The late 90s were a golden age for survival horror games, dominated by Resident Evil's massive success. But while Capcom and other developers thrived, Sega's Saturn console missed out on a survival horror blockbuster. Deep Fear released towards the end of the Saturn's lifespan, and would be Sega's ambitious attempt to capture some of the magic that made Resident Evil a hit. Deep Fear released in 1998 for the Sega Saturn, but only in Japan and Europe. The US Saturn market was already collapsing, which meant that Deep Fear never made it stateside, limiting its reach, which is a shame because the game offered a unique twist on the genre's formula by taking players out of haunted mansions and into an underwater military research facility. The story begins with an unusual space pod crashing into the ocean, causing a strange extraterrestrial infection to spread among the nearby underwater facility's crew, turning them into horrific monsters. The setting is a huge departure from the haunted mansions of Resident Evil or the foggy streets of Silent Hill, as the plot takes place entirely underwater, which creates an unsettling sense of claustrophobia. You're trapped hundreds of feet below the surface with no easy escape. You play as John, an ex-Navy SEAL turned safety officer, tasked with surviving and rescuing his team. The setting feels eerily claustrophobic, with air becoming a critical resource, rooms slowly losing oxygen, and you have to replenish it at specific stations, adding tension to the usual survival horror mechanics. The facility itself becomes a crucial part of the survival challenge, as rooms slowly lose oxygen over time, forcing you to constantly monitor and replenish air supplies, using specific stations. The oxygen mechanic adds a layer of tension and urgency, making Deep Fear stand out from an otherwise crowded genre. What sets the game apart is its blend of science fiction with elements of classic horror, but despite the unique setting and some standout features, the game struggled to leave the same impact as Resident Evil or Silent Hill, mainly due to the popularity of the PlayStation. Where Resident Evil drew its inspiration from zombie films like Night of the Living Dead, Deep Fear leans heavily into science fiction, borrowing elements from John Carpenter's The Thing and James Cameron's The Abyss. Like The Thing, the infection in Deep Fear mutates crew members into monstrous creatures, while the underwater isolation mirrors the tension found in The Abyss. These influences help create an eerie, oppressive atmosphere that is both familiar and unique, blending the best of horror and sci-fi into one package. While Deep Fear aimed to bring innovation to survival horror, it stuck close to many of the genre's staples. Gameplay follows the classic formula established by games like Resident Evil, with fixed camera angles, tank controls, and a focus on puzzle solving and resource management. The slower paced action is typical of survival horror from the era, with moments of tension punctuated by exploration and combat. However, what makes Deep Fear different, perhaps too different, is its overly generous resource system. Unlike other survival horror games, Deep Fear allows you to access infinite ammo from storage units to refill your health at medical stations scattered throughout the facility. While this also eliminates the fear of running out of supplies, it also removes the key element of survival horror, which is scarcity. With fewer consequences for wasting ammo or health, the tension diminishes, making the game feel less punishing and ultimately less terrifying. Combat, while functional, also suffers due to the game's forgiving resource system. You may have access to a variety of weapons, including standard firearms and futuristic tools like harpoon guns for underwater sections, yet the combat lacks the intensity seen in other survival horror titles. The ability to easily replenish ammo and health removes much of the challenge and the enemy encounters. While creatively designed, don't instill the same fear as the relentless zombies of Resident Evil or the psychological horrors of Silent Hill. From the gameplay perspective, Deep Fear does stay true to its classic survival horror roots, with the action being slow paced, the emphasis on puzzles, backtracking, and managing resources. While it lacks in some areas, it makes up for in others. The game, like many other entries during this era would also suffer from a common issue with poor voice acting, but that also adds to its unique charm, with characters delivering stiff, awkward lines that in many ways don't make sense, but at the same time they are what adds appeal to the game, and for many of us that's what we remember the most. But behind the voice acting, Deep Fear features an outstanding soundtrack that also does help to elevate the atmosphere when it truly needs it. Despite Sega assembling a talented development team for the creation of the game, it still didn't manage to break out. The timing of its release and declining Saturn market doomed the game to obscurity, but for fans of retro survival horror it is a hidden gem worth revisiting, even if it never quite achieved the same legendary status as Resident Evil. But in many ways it's the perfect alternative to these classic games of the era. But in conclusion, Deep Fear is seen as a fascinating piece of survival horror history. It may not have become Sega's answer to Resident Evil, but it definitely remains a testament to the experimental and ambitious spirit of 90s gaming that has all of the elements that you'd be familiar with these type of games. And if you want something that feels similar to the games you loved playing growing up, this will be the next best thing. And with that being said, Deep Fear is just one of many of these games that have been released during this period that is often overlooked, especially on Sega's long history of consoles, that we do need to dive into further, as there are so many interesting additions that are worth exploring, which we can learn more about in this next video, so you might want to check it out.